To preface this review, I'd like to start by explaining my history and opinion on that of the entire God of War franchise. So, in all honesty, my personal opinion, I love God of War. I don't think they've ever hit a snag with any God of War game. I would say the weakest was God of War Ascension, just because there wasn't really that tongue-in-cheek kind of power within the story, because Kratos... It was a prequel story for Kratos, and it was basically right before he got all angry and shit. But that's still a solid and very well-made game. I have no gripes against God of War Ascension, and that being the lowest on the totem pole for the franchise. If I were to say which one is my favorite, I'd probably have to go with 2018's God of War, with God of War 2 being a very close second. And that makes sense because, honestly, God of War 2 and 2018's God of War are kind of one and the same in the sense of the scope, the epicness, the story, the breathtaking visuals. Just both of those, in the time periods that they released, they were just breathtaking and refreshing and original. And as far as 2018's God of War, for my opinion, I loved it. I had very few complaints with it. Really, the only complaint I had with it was I'm not really a timing combat kind of gamer, but I still play them, obviously. And with 2018's God of War, that was really my only gripe with it, was just kind of the gameplay. With how long it was, there wasn't really too much variation in the gameplay of it, other than the puzzles and everything, and the boss fights, but otherwise the main gameplay was that of timed combat. And I loved 2018's God of War. If I had my YouTube channel back then in 2018 as I do now, and I reviewed it, hands down it would be a 10 out of fucking 10. No question about it. It just, everything back then that it did, just rejuvenated the franchise for what it strongly needed. I loved all of God of War, even the simple gameplay of the original God of War games, just the simplicity of it. They could have just done such a simple, bare bones game and story and history of God of War, where it's just hack and slasher and nothing really else. And that's kind of what the gameplay used to be, but all of the God of War games and all of God of War in its entirety is always bolstered by such strong writing, such great stories, great storytelling. And 2018's God of War really rejuvenated the storytelling for the franchise as well, because it was basically the gameplay within a one-shot storytelling kind of direction. And I do commend Cory Barlog for how he designed 2018's God of War. Now, fast forward 4 years later, we got the release of God of War Ragnarok. And unfortunately, I still didn't have a PlayStation 5 at the time. So fast forward another 3-4 months, and I finally own my own PS5. And here we are, my first review for the PS5. God of War Ragnarok. Basically, as a very simple synopsis of it, think of every aspect of 2018's God of War, put it into Ragnarok, and put it on a new gen, expand the scope, and you have God of War Ragnarok. It is basically the exact same thing as 2018's God of War, which isn't a bad thing. It's a really good thing, because every stride they took in 2018's God of War worked perfectly. I loved 2018's God of War reboot. God of War Ragnarok's visuals are basically 2018's, but on new gen. And that's really the simplest way I can put that. With the inclusion of more 4K, because PS5 is stronger, it actually utilizes full 4K. And not just that, the HDR is fucking mind-blowing. You go into caves, caverns, dungeons, even inside of not very well-lit houses, and oh my god, the black levels and the red levels from the flames, just all of it. It looks beautiful. And the world itself, the Icelands, the grasslands, everything just fucking pops out at your eyes. It's like you're playing a 3D game and it's not 3D at all. It's kind of like every Avatar movie you watch in theaters, especially in 3D. It fully immerses you in the world of God of War, that of Asgard, Midgard, everything. Now, I have really good things to say about Ragnarok, mainly just because it implemented 99% of the same shit from 2018's God of War. With that being said, that also added in some bumps and bruises into Ragnarok as well. The main one being the story and the storytelling is so goddamn similar to 2018's God of War. It's literally a copy-paste storytelling that the first 20 to 30 minutes, where you're reintroduced to Kratos and Atreus, or Loki, and then you get introduced to the new big bads, and them being Thor and Odin, and then along the way you meet new characters. Okay, well, all is well and fine. The problem I had with the story and the storytelling is that the intro, just the beginning sequence, was so similar to the introduction of 2018's God of War with The Stranger, where you're Kratos and Atreus, and you go back to the house after doing some things, and then you get into the house, you relax, and then big bads come, they talk to you for a little bit, you politely say no, and then they fuck your shit up. It was the exact copy-paste as The Stranger introduction in 2018's God of War. It's still amazing. The direction of it is still phenomenal. I have no complaints with the direction and how they did it. I have a problem with the fact that it's the exact same thing. It has been there, done that. Now, along the way too, this is roughly a 20-hour game, and I know this, for the main story, it does take about 20 hours, that even being on the easiest difficulty for the give me a story difficulty, 20 hours, which is a whole lot of game, even just the story, 20 hours, and that's great, you would think. And it was great. 90% of the time, I loved that it was a long, drawn-out story filled with even more deepening, rich characters, and added in new characters. With that being said, along the way, the story starts getting a bit bare bones. You think outside of the world building and character development, and you realize that it is literally another simple story of man goes and seeks redemption and vengeance against big bad guys. And it's literally copy-paste from 2018's God of War, with the exception of the new characters aren't really as unique as 2018's God of War's new characters, such as Jormungandr, a giant fucking world-sized snake, the head in the tree Mimir. Ragnarok, basically the most unique characters are the characters that we're really already so overly familiar with, thanks Marvel, such as like Thor and Odin. Now, they do spice it up with, Frood, Freya returns, Freyr, and among other new characters, and there are plenty of new characters and pre-existing characters. I don't have a problem with the amount of casting for characters. It's more about balance, and that's about the worst part about God of War Ragnarok. It's the balance in the game. Not so much the gameplay specifically, it's just every time there's a gripe that I had, it mainly had to do with the unevenness and the unbalancing of the game, such as the character roster that you find within the story. There were a lot more bugs than 2018's God of War. If I remember correctly, I really didn't find any bugs or glitches in 2018's. In Ragnarok, it was, I'd say, one in every other playthrough, and I'd play through for about 2 hours each time at least on average. And then not just that, the balancing issue persisted even more by the end of it. So you play it on Give Me a Story mode, and okay, you're expecting just full-on story. That's fine, all and well and good, up until about 90% through the story, where you have some trouble, but it's really nothing bad. You die here and there, but it's nothing terribly anger-filled. But then you get to the last 2 chapters of the story, and I understand you like to ramp it up to give them, a bit of a challenge by the end, but that's why you have a difficulty setting. I hate when games fucking do that. They give you a difficult setting between easy to nightmarish, but even the easy, you can barely beat the fucking story. They have games where you don't pick a difficulty, you just play through as it is. Unfortunately, this game had a difficulty setting, and even by the end of the story, it was like you were dying non-stop, no matter what difficulty it was. So, playing on the easiest, God only knows what it would have been like on whatever the hardest was, like give me God of War or whatever, because I died a shit ton by the very end. And it was mainly just in the last half of the 3rd act of the story. And then not just the difficulty problems I had, just the unevenness, it was also, they put the harder difficulty into mini bosses on the environments by the end of it. And then the bosses, such as Thor and Odin, they felt actually really easy to play through and beat. That was the biggest gripe I had with the balancing issue. It was just, they gave random enemies on the ground hard-ass difficulties by the end, so that when you start playing and fighting Thor and Odin and the like, it just felt easy as hell, kind of like hollow. Kind of like they just wanted the game to end, give you a break just to end it to get through the story. And that's fine, but like I said, they brought in balancing issues, especially for the storytelling of the combat. Honestly, I didn't hate this game, God of War Ragnarok. I actually loved this game. I loved playing through it. I loved that it was its own adventure. It didn't just feel like a middling chapter or anything. I loved that you explored more environments. It's not just the Midgard environments in 2018's. They also added in more of the mythology, and that comes more environments, and I did appreciate that. The problem I had was that 2018's God of War is definitely the superior game. God of War Ragnarok fills you in on so much more lore and history. Yes, God of War Ragnarok does a lot more things in such better ways than 2018's. The problem, though, is 2018's God of War just felt so much more consistent as a game overall. Now, I do love God of War Ragnarok, but it had a lot of issues for me. I'm not a fan of unevenness in the gameplay. Overall, for me, God of War Ragnarok is an excellent, phenomenal game. I would highly recommend everybody that owns a PS5 to play it. Never played it on PS4. I would not recommend it either way. Play it on PS5 just for the breathtaking visuals. It's like when you go and saw Avatar in the theaters, whether it's the first one or The Way of Water in 3D, you're not really there for the story, even though the first one had a pretty good story. It was more so the immersion and experience, and that's at the very least what you would get from God of War Ragnarok because of the visuals, because of the lighting, because of the direction, and everything like that. And the gameplay, although it is a hit or miss kind of gameplay, you either love Dark Souls-ish gameplay or you don't. But overall for me, God of War Ragnarok is an extremely solid 8 out of 10. Whereas 2018's God of War was a 10 out of 10. So I loved it. There were just a lot more problems compared to 2018's. So 8 out of 10, God of War Ragnarok. Thank you. If you liked this video, please feel free to join my membership plan on here. It will greatly help me in the future. Thank you.